Here's the thing. I filmed an entire video yesterday, and when I sat down to film the video and I looked in the little viewfinder, I went, the color looks a little weird. But I just got these glasses. They're pink tinted, and they're supposed to help with light sensitivity, and I thought, well, it's probably not that the color is actually that weird in the video. It's probably that I got these new glasses that impact the way I see color. So it's probably fine. Finished the video, put it into my editing software to edit it, and went, no, the lighting really is just like that. It's bad. So I decided that I would refilm the entire video. So, lucky me. Anyways, what am I here to talk about? Today I'm here to talk about 6 or 7 different pieces of Sapphic media that I think are worth consuming this Pride Month. And when I say 6 or 7, you'll be like, you don't know. Trust me, it'll make sense once we kind of get going here. The first piece of Sapphic media that I think is worth consuming this Pride Month is a movie that I have actually talked about before. It is the 2004 movie Saving Face. The initial tension or plot point in the movie Saving Face is that Will, our primary character, her mother becomes pregnant, and she gets kind of kicked out of her family. She gets disowned until she can find a husband because she is currently unspoused. And so she decides to move in with Will because she doesn't really have any other options. So Will, her life feels like it's falling apart because now her mother is moving in with her. Her mother is pregnant, so she has to deal with all these like pregnancy cravings. Will is I believe she's supposed to be a surgeon, so she's already very busy because she's like some fancy doctor. And then Will meets a woman named Vivian who she starts to have a relationship with, and that's a whole thing. So the whole thing is Will feels like her life is falling apart. Her mother is living with her. Her mother now has a microscope over her life and is critiquing everything that she does. Will is a doctor, so she's already inherently busy, and now she feels that she can't always make time for Vivian, which is causing strains in the relationship because to have a successful relationship, you need to spend some amount of time together, and it's becoming difficult to do that. One of the things that I really like about this movie, and I mentioned this in the other video where I talked about this movie, is that it switches so much between English and Chinese, because most of our characters are Chinese Americans. Almost all of the characters we see in the movie are Chinese Americans. And so it makes sense that they wouldn't speak just English, because that's not who they are. In the other video where I talked about this movie, I said that reminded me a lot of the feminist scholar Gloria Anzaldúa, who one of her more famous works was called How to Tame a Wild Tongue. And in that, she talked about the experience of living in the United States, and her primary language, the language that she speaks and she is comfortable with the most, is a mix between English and Spanish. It's a sort of Spanglish. And she is critiqued by people in the United States who tell her, you need to speak American, or English. And she's critiqued by people from Spanish-speaking countries who say that she's not speaking true Spanish and she needs to speak real Spanish. And her argument is that she will not fully be accepted until it is accepted that she is speaking, and she will speak, the language that she wants to speak. Until she can speak this sort of bilingual language, she will not truly be free. And that is what I really love about Saving Face, is that they are not adhering to the standard of, you're in the United States, you need to speak English. They are still speaking Chinese because they are Chinese Americans. Another thing that I really like about this movie is that it is one of those lighter queer movies where nothing particularly terrible happens. In some of these other pieces of media that I'm talking about, you will see that like there are some stories that are just soaked in trauma, and that's like the main conflict. Trauma. Which there is a time and a place for that, I do believe, but we also need media so badly that isn't just bad things happen to characters and we just watch the bad things happen to the characters. Sure, there are things that are bad that happen to these characters, but they're not inherently, like, terrible, like life-altering. The biggest bad thing that happens, I would say, is to the mother where she gets pregnant. But we're not talking about a movie where like people die or people are being killed or hunted or something like that. We're talking about a movie where a doctor is struggling to make time for her girlfriend. We're talking about a movie where a woman is trying to navigate how to tell her parents that she's gay when she has already told them that she's gay, but they just don't believe it. These are tensions that are realistic. These are tensions that aren't inherently terrible. This is a rom-com. This is inherently a movie that is supposed to be light. This is a movie where everything happens and you can still see the comedy and the humor in things. You can still see the romance story without it being, like, devastating. And my final thought about why I like this movie so much is this is a movie that centers the experience of queer Asian women, Asian American women, without fetishizing them. A lot of times you'll find in content that has, and this is even kind of discussed in the film, you'll find content that focuses on Asian women, but in a very fetishized way, in a way that shows them as sexual objects instead of people. This is a movie which shows the Asian American women as people. And, like, the bar is very low. The bar is essentially on the ground at this point, but it's still very important that we have those pieces of media where we are centering the experiences of different marginalized communities, where we aren't sexualizing them, where we aren't putting them as sexual objects, where we're still showing them as people. The next piece of media that I think is worth consuming this Pride Month is another movie. It came out in 2001, and here's the thing. A lot of the movies that I have been watching recently are on Tubi. And if you don't know, Tubi is a free streaming platform. It's supported by ads, so there's no subscription. You can technically make an account, but I never have. But the thing with Tubi is a lot of their movies are terrible. I have been watching a lot of Sapphic movies, and so on Letterboxd I created a list titled Sapphic Movies. And then after watching about 16 bad queer movies, I had to create a new list on Letterboxd titled Sapphic Movies Worth Watching. This is a movie that ended up on the Sapphic Movies Worth Watching. It is titled My Fiona. And I don't have very many notes on this movie, so this kind of happened yesterday when I recorded this. I wasn't exactly sure where the conversation was gonna go, because I only have 2 notes written down here. So here we go again. So the movie My Fiona, the titular character Fiona actually isn't involved in the movie very much. The whole movie revolves around her suicide. So at the very beginning of the movie, we see Fiona sitting in an office space with her office business partner, friend, best friend, Jane. And Fiona turns to Jane and says, like, hey, can you give me a minute? I need to go do something and I'll be back. And Jane says, yeah, sure, whatever. And then it's in that moment that Fiona decides to end her own life. So then Jane has to deal with, oh my goodness, this just happened, what do I do now? The other character who we really revolve around is Fiona's widow, Gemma. So Gemma and Fiona had a child, his name is Bailey, he's like 7. So he's still really young. And the movie revolves around Jane and Gemma trying to move forward after Fiona's suicide. So we have Jane who decides to tell Gemma, like, hey, I know that I've never really been particularly involved in your son's life, but I would like to babysit him to kind of help you out right now. So we see Jane take on this role as an additional caretaker for the child. And she does not a great job because she's never really interacted with children a whole lot before, so she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's never parented, and she's put into this role as pseudo-parent. And Gemma is a successful, like, she works in law, she's a successful woman, and she's trying to turn over Fiona's portion of the business that she and Jane run to Jane, and Jane is like, no, you don't need to do that, and Gemma is like, well, we really do not need the money. I don't know what you want to do about the business now that Fiona is not here, but I want you to take our portion and figure out how to move forward. The movie really turns into a case study in grief and the different ways that different people will handle grief. Really what we get is we get 2 people who know each other, like they're friendly with each other, but they're not friends. And so the experience as we start to see it starts as a business deal, where Jane says, I will be a babysitter for your son. And then it turns into, we are kind of becoming friends, and then it turns into, we are bonding so much over the death of this person who was in both of our lives. And the obvious conclusion is that to move forward, we should be together. Which, saying that out loud, it sounds kind of ridiculous, like, your wife just died, and so now you are going to get into some sort of relationship with her best friend to cope. But also, like, who am I to judge about how they're coping? Like, this is probably a situation that has happened in real life. Like, they don't know how to cope with this such severe loss, and so the only connection that they have is with each other. And so they decide to explore that more. And everything gets more complicated because we also now have this child in the mix, a very young child who is dealing with the death of his mother. And he says at one point in the movie, like, I don't remember the names. It was like one of them was Mom and one of them was Ma or something like that. And so he says, like, Mom was the one who died, but I wish Ma would have been the one who died, which is, like, heartbreaking to hear, but it's also probably an experience of grief that a child could have. Everything is falling apart for all of the characters, and it all kind of falls apart into each other. One of the things that I like about this movie is that we do get some of the plot points coming from Jane has never been with a woman before, and she has never seen herself as, like, bisexual, and so she's learning to explore her sexuality. But that's not the main plot point. The main plot point isn't the characters are gay. It is the characters are suffering from a severe loss, and they're trying to figure out how to move forward, and they just so happen to be gay. This is a movie where being gay is not the focal point, it's just kind of a side plot. And another thing that I think is really important about this movie, just like with Saving Face, is that it does center marginalized identities. So not only are we centering the lesbian experience, the coming into being bisexual experience, but also Gemma, one of the main characters, is a black woman. So it's not just the lesbian experience, it's the black lesbian experience. This movie is not rated particularly well on, I think I looked at IMDb and Letterboxd, but I think that it does do things really well. It does show grief really well. It is that kind of case study into how different people deal with grief after losing someone so close to them. Moving on to a slightly less heavy piece of media, we have the 2020 movie The World to Come. This is the one piece of media on this list of mine that is like a true period piece. It takes place in, I believe, the 1800s in rural New York, and it follows two women, Abigail and Tally. So Abigail and her husband Dyer, they live in rural New York, and a new couple, Tally and her husband, whose name I don't remember, they move in. Abigail and Tally, they have like one interaction where they're like, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Thank you." And then from there, they kind of become friends, and then they become more than friends. One of the things that I can really appreciate about period pieces is that I like the idea of showing this is what a relationship may have looked like at this time, where you don't necessarily think gay people existed then. Something that I really like about this movie is it got me focusing on the mundanity of life and how the day-to-day can just be so boring. But that doesn't mean that, like, things aren't happening. So there's so much in the movie where it's like there's no background music and it's just the two characters talking and having a conversation. And you're kind of like, well, this is boring, nothing's happening. And then you're like, wait a second. This is two people having a conversation. This is how real life works. People sit down and they talk to each other. There's even one scene where Abigail and Tally are having a conversation with each other, and Abigail says this: "When I was a little girl, I thought I could cultivate my intellect and do something for the world. But my life has surprised me by being far more ordinary." And there's really a sense of sadness in that, and the idea of I wanted to do something to change the world, but it turns out my day-to-day looks like everyone else's day-to-day, where we just kind of get through the day. And that idea can be devastating, but at the same time, I think it's important to realize that even if we are going to somehow change the world, a lot of our day-to-day is going to be boring. One of the main tensions in this movie, which I think is really interesting, is we also get the argument of what is happiness as a queer person? Is happiness being able to simply exist as a queer person, or is happiness being able to be visible as a queer person? I'm actually reading some really interesting theory right now about the experience of rural queer women and how that is inherently different from the experience of queer women who exist in metros. And one of the interesting things that has come up is the idea of coming out versus being out, and like visibility. What does visibility necessarily mean? So in this, we have neither character has really come out to anyone, and we have one character who wants so badly to be out. She wants to exist in a queer space. She wants to have this queer relationship and have that visible to others, and she thinks that that will bring her happiness. And we have someone else who, again, hasn't come out and doesn't necessarily want to be out, but that still, like, she still is finding satisfaction in the relationship. What she has is enough for her. And using the theory that I have not finished reading but sort of understand, we could argue that one of these characters really encapsulates the experience of being a rural queer woman, where just existing as a gay person is enough. Like, she doesn't need to be particularly visible, where we have the experience of the other woman, which is more of a metro-centered, where being visible is very important to her. Neither of the experiences are wrong, neither of them are bad. They're just different. So we have the two characters navigating, how do we navigate this differently, where we both can get what we want, but also we need to take into consideration that we are both married to men and we are living in a time frame where women don't really have rights, let alone queer women. My biggest critique about this movie is the two main characters, Abigail and Tally. For the most part, every single scene that Abigail is in, I believe that she is a woman in the 1800s. I believe that she is existing in the time frame that they are depicting. Tally, I can tell that she is a modern day actress acting. I think she does a really good job acting, but looking at her, like, I don't believe for a second that she is actually existing in the 1800s. Like, just looking at her face, I'm like, that woman has seen an air fryer. That woman knows how a light switch works. So my biggest complaint, I guess we could say, is believability, but it's not necessarily believability of the plot, it's just believability of the actresses existing in the time frame that they're depicting. Moving on to our next piece of media. This is the piece of media that will kind of make it make sense when I said that we will be talking about either 6 or 7 pieces of media. We are right now going to be talking about Alice Isn't Dead, and this is technically 2 different pieces of media. Haha, it all makes sense. So we have first the podcast Alice Isn't Dead, which came out in 2016, and then we will, after that, be talking about the novel Alice Isn't Dead, which came out in 2018. But first, the podcast. One of the opening quotes to the podcast Alice Isn't Dead is, "This is not a story, it's a road trip." The whole plot of Alice Isn't Dead is that Alice has died, and her widow Keisha is devastated. But Keisha turns on the news one day and she looks in the background and she sees Alice. And she's like, wait a second. That's my wife, but my wife just died. And she continues watching different news stations and she starts to see her wife Alice pop up all over the country. So Keisha becomes a truck driver so she can travel the country looking for her wife who she thought was dead. While all of this is happening, Keisha runs into someone who she calls the Hungry Man because of the way that he is just devouring eggs in a diner in a really unsettling fashion. And then after devouring the eggs, Keisha watches him, like, eat the face of a man. And she's like, oh, that's a lot. That's a lot that's happening right now. And so she tries to get help and the police just kind of look at her and they're like, well, what do you want us to do? And so she is trying to figure out, 1, what is going on with my wife who I thought was dead? 2, what is going on with this hungry man? Who is he? Where did he come from? And 3, why is no one helping me? Why, when I bring this up to people in positions of power, such as the police, does no one believe me? Does everyone just say, well? The podcast turns into Keisha is fighting all of the powers that be in the country while on this journey. The podcast isn't particularly long, so there are 3 different parts, and each part has 10 chapters, so there are only 30 episodes. You could definitely get through this in a day if you want to. But while the podcast isn't necessarily, like, long, I do think there is a lot to unpack. In this podcast, we are really unpacking a lot. So we do get the experience of these 2 women being in a relationship with each other. We get kind of their entire backstory, how they came to be, how they learn to live with each other and love each other. We are getting the experience of realizing that people in positions of power are complicit or complacent in everything that is happening, and how do we change that. And one of the things that is really central to specifically Keisha's identity is that she is anxious. She has, like, clinically diagnosed anxiety. And so we get a lot of anxiety from Keisha, which is really, I don't want to say nice to see, but I think it is a really accurate depiction of anxiety. And after reading the book, there is not an epilogue, but like an author's note, where the author of the book, who is also who is also the author of the podcast, says that he himself has anxiety, and so for him, it was really important that in both the podcast and the book, Keisha is anxious the entire time. She never overcomes her anxiety. She is as anxious at the end of the podcast and the book as she was at the beginning, because anxiety isn't necessarily something that you overcome or that you come out on the other side of. It's something that you continuously need to work through. I think it's really good. I think the depiction of anxiety is really good, and I will say that, kind of transitioning from talking to the podcast to about the book, I think the book does a better job depicting anxiety because we get the longer form, so we get more opportunities to explore. This is exactly what Keisha is feeling in this moment, and it is anxiety. My complaint about the book is that the book is advertised in the podcast as, if you enjoy this podcast, you will enjoy the new novel, Alice Isn't Dead. And yes, I enjoyed the podcast, and there were parts of the book that I enjoyed. I thought the book was fine, but I feel like the book loses some of the charm from the podcast. There are some particular stories that they either cut out entirely or they just kind of reduce to like a sentence or a paragraph, when in the podcast, like, it's an entire episode is based on this. I feel like with the book, because it is longer form, they're making more of a narrative of what's happening, whereas with the podcast, we get like snippets of Keisha's life. We get the snippet of, this thing just happened to me and I need to tell you about it right now. Whereas with the novel, we have the opportunity to say, this is everything that's happening. You don't need to know this one specific story. I think that if you go into the book not having listened to the podcast at all, it holds up. Like, it's fine as a story. I think I would have enjoyed it more. But having listened to the podcast first, I was a little disappointed in the book. I do think the book is still good. I think it is worth listening to, and that's another point. I think that this is a story that you need to listen to. I don't think reading the book, like reading a physical book, would capture the story well. I think you do need to listen to the audiobook. And they do use the same voice actor in the podcast and the audiobook, which I think is really important in cementing the character's voice, because you can really kind of come to hear her and understand her. And I do also think they picked a very good voice actor. I think the voice actor does an incredible job in both the podcast and the book. This is another piece of media where it involves queer characters, but the focus of the story isn't a coming out story. This is a podcast and a book, an audiobook, where the characters are just existing as gay characters. They are gay, and that is important to who they are, but that's not the primary focus. The primary focus isn't, we are going to sit here and discuss my queerness. The primary focus is, we are going to sit here and discuss how we overcome everything that is happening to us and to the world right now. Moving on to another piece of media where the characters just so happen to be gay, we have the 2020 Netflix original series, The Haunting of Bly Manor. I love this show. This is a story which follows Dani Clayton, who is a young American woman who comes to the UK, and in the UK she decides that she is going to get a job. So she gets a job as an au pair to two young children whose parents have died. She is living with these two young children in this mansion in the countryside of England, and there are a few different staff who are also on staff. So we have a groundskeeper, gardener type person named Jamie, we have a cook named Owen, and we have a housekeeper type person named Hannah. The whole plot is revolving around spooky things are happening in this manor, and the kids are acting weird. And we're trying to figure out what is going on in the manor, why are the kids acting weird, and also, why are the kids sneaking out at night? Because every month or so, everyone will wake up and there will be these muddy footprints going into the forbidden wing of the house. Why are the kids waking up in the middle of the night and leaving these muddy footprints and going into the forbidden wing of the house? One of the things that I really appreciate about this story is how non-linear it is. So this is a story that I think could be told completely chronologically, and it would be so incredibly boring. A lot of the suspense in this is that we're getting so many flashbacks, and we're getting just like pieces of context, but not all at the same time. And that really builds up the tension and the stress and the what is happening, and that builds into like the thrill of the horror. I would argue that this is a piece of media that at times is really mind-bending because you're trying to figure out what's going on, and then the story will switch to a completely different plot line that you're like, oh, well, now why are we talking about this? And then 2 episodes later, you're like, oh. The way that this is set up is that we have characters in the modern day, in the 2020s, who are sitting around a fire, essentially, and one of them says, I have a ghost story, and she is recounting the story of Danny Clayton going to Bly Manor. And she says at the beginning that this is going to be a ghost story. And at the end, and this is not a spoiler, in the modern day, in the 2020s, one of the other characters says, I think you set it up wrong. You said it was a ghost story, it's a love story. And that's one of the things that I really love about The Haunting of Bly Manor, is that it is a ghost story. And at the same time, it is also a love story. We get the love story between Danny, the au pair, and Jamie, the gardener. You can't separate the haunting of it, the ghostliness of it, from the love story, from the romance of it. It isn't, like, you wouldn't go into this saying, this is a romance TV show. It's not a romance TV show, but there is such a romantic plotline to it that the romance is also central to the identity of the show. And just another note about The Haunting of Bly Manor, this is part of an anthology, so there is a different Netflix original series titled The Haunting of Hill House. They're written by the same guy, they share some of the same actors. You don't need to watch one to understand the other. I would definitely also recommend watching The Haunting of Hill House. It's kind of the same thing, a mind-bending, supernatural, non-linear horror story. There is also Sapphic representation in The Haunting of Hill House, but that's definitely not a central plot point as it is with The Haunting of Bly Manor. And before moving on to my final piece of media, I do have a couple of honorable mentions. First on my list of honorable mentions is the 2008 movie I Can't Think Straight. This is a piece of British media which is based off of a book that I have not read, but it follows 2 different women. Both are in a relationship, not with each other. One of them is about to be married and is planning her wedding, but then the 2 women meet each other and they go, oh. The movie does fall under the general genre of rom-com, so it is one of those lighter movies, and at the same time it does have some really interesting takes on international politics. One of the main characters is Jordanian, but she has Palestinian descent, so there are moments where we are talking about the Palestine-Israel conflict. Another movie on my list of honorable mentions is the 2005, also British film, Imagine Me and You. This is also a rom-com, and this is like the lesbian rom-com. This is like the movie that everyone has seen, which is part of the reason why I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to talk more about some kind of lesser known pieces of media, but I do think that Imagine Me and You is a pillar in the Sapphic canon. And then my last honorable mention is the 2025 movie See You Soon, directed by Alexandra Swarens. If you haven't explored Alexandra Swarens' movies, I definitely think that they're worth looking into, because they seem to be movies where she doesn't want anything like super particularly terrible to happen to her characters. I also think that the movies are like lower stimulation, like they're not like action movies, and I think that that really helps. I think that the dialogue is written really well, and the dialogue in every movie that I have seen so far feels realistic. It feels like a conversation that would actually happen. The plot of this particular movie, See You Soon, is that a woman is on a layover in France, and she meets a woman named Juliette, and then they have kind of like a 3-day long first date, which is definitely like, that is a lesbian experience, having a 3-day long first date with someone you literally just met. She does have a couple other movies that I would also look into. Looking for Her is like a Hallmark type Christmas movie, and she also has Superbloom, which wasn't my favorite, and the other one that I have seen is Over Easy, which was also not my favorite, but it had some really good moments in it. So now the 6th or 7th, depending on how you count Alice Isn't Dead, piece of media that I would like to talk about today that I think is worth consuming this Pride Month is the 2023 movie You Can Live Forever. This is another movie that I found on Tubi that I was incredibly surprised by, and I actually paid real money to purchase this because I was like, I would like to continue watching this and I cannot stand the ads anymore. This is a movie that is technically a period piece. It takes place in the early 1990s, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I didn't even realize it. I had watched the movie about 3 times before looking it up on, I think, IMDb, and it said, like, takes place in the early 1990s. And I was like, what? No, it doesn't. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, I guess they are using landlines, and she does have, like, not a Walkman, but, like, something that looks like a Walkman, and I guess, yeah. This movie follows Jamie, who is a teen whose dad just died. Her mom doesn't feel that she can adequately support her right now, so she gets shipped off to live with her aunt and uncle, who are part of the truth. They are Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses have some beliefs that I would argue are a little bit more extreme than other sects of Christianity. So Jamie is uncomfortable, partially because she is around all of these Christians, and she is not a Christian, she doesn't believe in God, but especially because of the beliefs and the way that they are being portrayed to her. The way that she is being told, you need to participate in this and this and this and this because you are now with us, and like, you are not technically part of the truth, but you need to exist as if you are part of the truth. So at her very first Jehovah's Witness meeting, she is sitting outside afterwards, and another young teen approaches her. Her name is Marika, and she says, like, hi, my name is Marika. Like, it'll be nice to have you here. And so these two, they start like a unlikely friendship that turns into more than friends, that turns into a full-on relationship that they have to hide because they're living in the truth, and Marika also has a boyfriend. And so Marika is trying to navigate her own sexuality because she has up to this point never considered herself gay, and she is in a relationship with a man, and she is living in this particular culture which doesn't look fondly on gay people. And Jamie is trying to navigate, how do I deal with the grief of my father's death? I am in a completely new place, a new school, a new environment where I don't know anyone and I am uncomfortable. And also, I really like this girl and I think we have kind of a good thing going for us. But in order to spend time with her, I am lying to everyone and saying that, like, I believe in these things that I don't believe in. I feel like I am pretending. The things that I think this movie does really well is I think it really wellly depicts the experience of young love, like that first relationship where you're both like, this is everything that I ever could have wanted. This is a movie that really thrives on building the tension of, like, the two characters looked at each other, and you could be like, well, they just looked at each other, but it's like, no, they looked at each other. They were close to each other. They were physically near each other. And you're building all of this tension of, like, something's gonna happen between these two. I can tell that something is gonna happen between these two, but at this point we're pretty much going off of, like, glances and barely looking at each other and, like, trying to hold each other's hands, but then, like, pulling away really fast. But then, like, maybe we're gonna hold hands later, like... It's really definitely high school. It's definitely high school, but it does capture that young love really well. Another thing that I really appreciate about this movie, which is maybe an interesting thing to notice, is I think that the audio is really well done. I think that a lot of times with modern day movies, you'll have, like, the action scenes are so loud that you need to turn the TV down, but then the talking scenes are so quiet that you need to turn the TV up. I don't think this is a movie that has this issue. I think this is a movie that you can keep at the same volume the entire time and you'll be okay. I also think that the audio is really realistic, which I really appreciate. Like, there's a scene where they're standing in kind of like a side yard late at night, and we hear the two characters interacting. There's no background sound, and you hear, like, a dog barking in the distance, and you're like, yeah, if these two characters were actually really in this spot, in this place, this time of night, you would probably hear a dog barking like that in the distance, and it would probably sound exactly like it was that far away. If I had to use one word to describe this movie, I would say that it is devastating. And it is devastating for a lot of different reasons, and I don't feel that I can necessarily articulate all of the reasons without spoiling the movie. I will say that it is, I would argue, definitely worth the watch. It is a lot. I didn't grow up as a Jehovah's Witness, but I did grow up in the church. And so I feel like watching this, I can really feel the accuracy of this is how people in the church act. We have the people who really believe it and they are leading the congregation because they truly believe it. We have the people who believe it and at the same time are kind of mourning the loss of a life that they could have had they not come into the truth. We have people who are trying so hard to believe who really don't. And then we have the people who are trying so hard to believe that they want others to believe as well, because having the others believe as well is the only way that they can spend time together. It feels like a really accurate depiction of how the church functions, as well as how people within the church connect to the church. I don't really have a way to end this video, but I'm done now. Those are the pieces of media, the Sapphic pieces of media that I think are worth consuming this Pride Month. If you liked this, let me know. If you didn't like this, don't tell me.